I have spent more money on commercial fish attractants than most people spend on their first boat over a lifetime. My tackle box looked like a graveyard of half-used bottles, each one promising to be the ultimate secret weapon for base. Every shiny label swore this formula was the one that would finally make fish lose their minds and attack my bait. 5 times I won Angler of the Year, and not once did any of those expensive liquids deserve credit for a single trophy fish. 40 years on the water taught me plenty, but the most important lesson came from a complete stranger on an ordinary summer morning. That lesson cost me nothing, and it made every $15 bottle of attractant in my box completely worthless from that day forward. The fishing attractant industry survives because anglers like you and me keep believing that complicated chemistry beats simple biology every single time. But one morning at the reservoir, a quiet old man with a tiny bottle in his pocket proved that everything I believed was dead wrong. It was July, the air was already thick and hot at 6 in the morning, and I had been casting for 2 hours without a single bump. I was throwing everything in my arsenal at a rocky point where I knew base were holding along the deeper ledge structure. New soft plastics, fresh line, perfect presentation, and the water might as well have been empty for all the response I got back. Then I noticed a guy about 30 yards down the bank, older fellow, plain clothes, nothing fancy in his setup at all whatsoever. He was using a basic spinning rod with what looked like a cheap rubber worm, the kind you buy in a gas station bag. And this man was pulling in base after base, one right after another, 5 solid fish in maybe 20 minutes of casual fishing effort. I watched him land a 3-pounder, then a 4, then another 3, and my jaw was hanging open like a broken tackle box lid. Something was happening over there that had nothing to do with skill or spot selection, because I was fishing the same exact water structure. Now I need you to understand something about my pride, because it is a real thing that has gotten in my way before. I am a Hall of Fame tournament angler who has fished against the best sticks in this region for 4 straight decades of competition. Walking up to a stranger and admitting that he was outfishing me felt like swallowing a handful of rusty hooks going down sideways. But my curiosity has always been stronger than my ego, and that is probably why I have lasted this long in the game. So I reeled in, set my rod down, and walked over to him like a man who had just been humbled by the fish gods themselves. He was a kind fellow, maybe 70 years old, weathered hands, the kind of guy who has fished the same lake since before I was born. I asked him straight out what he was doing differently, because clearly the fish wanted whatever he was offering and not my expensive setup. He smiled like he had been waiting 40 years for someone to finally ask him that exact question on the water that morning. He reached into his front shirt pocket and pulled out a small brown glass bottle, the kind you see in a health food store. He unscrewed the cap, tilted it over his rubber worm, and let exactly 2 drops fall onto the soft plastic bait he was using. The smell hit me immediately, sweet and sharp, like black licorice or those old-fashioned cookies my grandmother used to bake for holidays. It was anise oil, pure anise essential oil, the same stuff people use in kitchens for baking and flavoring holiday treats every year. He told me his father taught him this trick in the 1950s, and his father learned it from an old Cajun guide down in Louisiana. 2 drops on a soft bait, cast it out, and the base come to you like you are ringing a dinner bell across the whole lake. I stood there holding that little bottle, reading the label, and honestly feeling like someone had just told me the earth was flat and proven it. But I watched him cast that treated worm out, and within 60 seconds his rod doubled over with another fat largemouth smashing the bait hard. The very next morning I drove to a health food store before sunrise and bought a bottle of pure anise essential oil for $6. I was at the same reservoir by 7, same rocky point, same conditions, same water temperature hovering right around 74 degrees that week. I rigged up 10 identical ribbon tailworms on Texas rigs. 5 with 2 drops of anise oil, and 5 completely clean and untreated. For the next 4 hours, I alternated, 1 cast with anise and 1 cast without, keeping a strict count of every single strike I received. The anise baits drew 17 strikes in 4 hours of fishing, while the clean baits pulled in only 4 strikes during that same period. 3 of my 5 biggest bass that day came on the very first cast after applying fresh anise oil to a brand new worm bait. I sat in my truck afterward staring at my logbook, doing the math over and over because the numbers felt almost too dramatic to believe. 41 years of competitive fishing, thousands of tournament hours logged, and a $6 bottle from a health food store just outperformed everything else. Now here is why this actually works, and I promise to keep the science simple because I am a fisherman and not a professor. A bass has nostrils called nares on the front of its snout, and those tiny openings contain smell receptors that are roughly 1,000 times more sensitive than yours. Water carries dissolved scent molecules directly into those nares, and the fish can detect certain compounds at concentrations measured in parts per billion range. Anise oil contains a chemical compound called anethol, and anethol has a molecular structure that disperses slowly and evenly through water over time. Unlike many synthetic attractants that blast a heavy chemical cloud and then vanish in seconds, anethol creates a long, gradual scent trail downstream. That trail acts like a highway that leads curious bass straight back to your bait sitting on the bottom waiting for them to arrive. The key difference is that anethol triggers the investigative feeding response, not the alarm response that many artificial chemicals accidentally activate in fish. Most commercial attractants contain so many competing synthetic compounds that they actually confuse the fish instead of attracting them cleanly and naturally. But here is where most people are going to mess this up, and I almost did too before I figured out the critical difference. Not every bottle labeled anise at the grocery store contains actual essential oil, because many of them are synthetic flavoring extracts dissolved in alcohol base. That alcohol-based stuff hits the water and dissolves completely within about 5 seconds, taking every bit of scent with it down the current immediately. You might as well be fishing with plain water on your bait for all the good a synthetic extract does once it washes away. What you need is 100% pure anise essential oil, which feels oily between your fingers and does not evaporate quickly when exposed. The real oil clings to soft plastic, seeps into the porous material slowly, and releases anethol into the surrounding water for 20 to 30 minutes consistently. I learned this the hard way on my second test day when I grabbed baking extract from the spice aisle instead of real oil. I caught absolutely nothing that entire morning and almost abandoned the whole idea before realizing my mistake was the product and not the method. The application method matters more than most people would ever guess, so let me walk you through exactly what I do every time. I carry a small half-ounce bottle with a glass dropper in my tackle box, filled with pure anise essential oil ready to go always. I hold the soft plastic bait by the hook, never touching the body with my bare fingers, and place one drop on the midsection. The second drop goes right on the tail or the tip of the bait, whichever end has the most action and movement during retrieval. Do not use 3 drops, do not use 4, because more is absolutely not better when it comes to scent concentration in the water. Too much anethol crosses a threshold in the fish brain from curiosity into suspicion, and a suspicious base will follow but never commit. 2 drops give you roughly a 20 to 30 minute window of peak effectiveness before you need to reapply fresh oil again. The whole bottle costs maybe $7 and lasts an entire season because you are using such a tiny amount each time you treat a bait. If any of this sounds useful so far, do me a favor and hit that like button because it genuinely helps other fishermen find this information. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever tried anise oil or any other kitchen ingredient as a fish attractant out there? Some of the best tricks I have ever learned came from reading comments on videos just like this one from regular everyday anglers sharing knowledge. Now, everything I have covered so far is the foundation, the basic method that will already put you ahead of 90% of bass fishermen. But I have been holding back the advanced techniques, the specific combinations and seasonal adjustments that turn this simple trick into my tournament weapon. These are methods that helped me win 2 of my 5 Angler of the Year titles, and I have never shared them publicly until right now. In the next section, I am going to reveal a second kitchen ingredient that pairs with anise to create something I call the double strike effect. Stay with me, because what comes next is going to completely change the way you think about choosing and preparing your baits forever. The first thing you need to understand about pairing anise oil with different bait types is that not all materials hold scent equally. Soft plastic baits are your best friend here because the material itself is microscopically porous and acts like a tiny sponge. A zoom trick worm or a Gary Yamamoto Senko will absorb anise oil into its surface and then bleed that scent back out gradually. That slow release is exactly what creates the sustained 20 to 30-minute scent plume I talked about in the foundation section. Hard baits like crankbaits and spinner baits have smooth sealed surfaces that let oil slide right off after 3 or 4 casts through the water. If you're throwing a jig with a soft plastic trailer like a Strike King Rage Craw or a Netbait Pocket Chunk, put your drops on the trailer only. The trailer holds the oil while the jig does the visual work, and together they cover both senses at the same time perfectly. My personal favorite setup is a 7-inch ribbon tailworm in green pumpkin with red flake, Texas rigged on a 4/0 hook, dragged slow along brush piles. That ribbon tail combination has put more 5-pound bass in my live well over the last 5 seasons than every other technique in my arsenal combined. I estimate it accounts for close to 40% of my total tournament weight during that entire stretch of competitive fishing seasons. One drop goes on the body right behind the hook point, and the second drop goes on that curly tail where it whips and kicks through the water. Every time that tail moves, it pushes a tiny pulse of anethole-scented water outward like a miniature broadcasting station calling fish in. But I want to tell you about a bait type that takes this concept to a level that honestly feels like you are cheating on the water. The tube bait has a hollow body, and that hollow chamber is the most efficient scent delivery system I have ever put in the water. I put 1 drop inside the tube and 1 drop on the outside tentacles, and that hollow cavity slowly pushes anise-scented water through the skirt. Every twitch of the rod tip squeezes a fresh burst of scent out through those rubber tentacles like a bellows pumping air through a forge. Now here's the part I have been building toward. The piece I held back from every competitor for over a decade of tournament fishing. What if I told you that anise oil alone is only half of the equation, and the other half has been sitting in your kitchen spice rack this entire time? Garlic powder, plain ordinary garlic powder, the same stuff you shake onto bread or toss into pasta sauce on a Tuesday night dinner. 1 drop of anise oil on the bait plus a light dusting of garlic powder pressed into the soft plastic surface with your thumb creates what I call the double strike trigger. Anise targets the olfactory system, the long-range smell detection that pulls a bass toward your bait from 15 or 20 feet away through the water column. Garlic targets a completely different sensory channel, the gustatory receptors, which are the taste sensors located inside the mouth and along the lateral line. When a bass mouths a bait dusted with garlic, it detects amino acid compounds that mimic the chemical signature of real crawfish and natural prey items. That taste signal tells the fish brain, this is food, hold on, and the bass keeps the bait in its mouth 1 to 2 extra seconds before deciding to reject. 1 extra second does not sound like much until you realize that most missed hook sets happen because the fish spit the bait in under a second flat. Anise brings them in from a distance, and garlic makes them commit long enough for you to drive that hook home with authority on the set. I keep a small Ziploc bag of McCormick garlic powder right next to my dropper bottle in the tackle box, and together they cost less than a gas station sandwich. Let me tell you exactly when this combination saved my season and proved to me it was not just theory but tournament-proven fact on the water. Late October, regional championship, stained water on a reservoir with temperatures dropping through the mid-50s and falling every day that week. Everybody was struggling, and I mean everybody, because most competitors brought in 1 or 2 fish, and several guys zeroed out completely that day. I had the anise and garlic combination on tube baits, fishing them painfully slow on a shaky head along a deep clay point structure. 5 bass came to the boat that day, 3.2, 2.8, 4.1, 2.5, and 3.7 pounds for a total of 16.3. I won that tournament by over 4 pounds, and the second place finisher walked up to me at the weigh-in and asked what I was throwing out there. I showed him the tube bait, and he nodded like it made sense, but I did not mention the anise or the garlic on that bait at all. In tournament fishing, you protect your edge the way a poker player protects his cards, and that combination was my hidden ace for years of competition. But this channel exists because I believe knowledge shared between anglers matters more than any trophy on my shelf at home. Now, the natural question is whether this double strike method works the same way in January as it does in July on the water. The answer has more layers than a simple yes or no, and understanding those layers is what separates the guy who tries this once from the angler who dominates with it all season long. Water temperature controls everything because it directly determines how fast a base processes scent information coming through the water column. When the water is warm, the fish metabolism runs hot, and those olfactory receptors are firing on every cylinder available to them. 60 degrees and above is your golden window, and spring through summer is when this method produces the most dramatic results you will ever see on the water. Standard 2 drop application with a 20-minute refresh cycle will have base hunting your bait like it owes them money from last season. Once fall rolls in and temperatures slide between 50 and 60 degrees, the scent disperses slower through cooler water and your effective radius shrinks noticeably. I compensate by refreshing the oil every 15 minutes instead of 20 and slowing my retrieve to keep the bait inside that tighter scent zone longer. Below 50 degrees in winter, the base metabolism drops hard and their sense of smell weakens, along with their desire to chase anything moving fast. I bump up to 3 drops and switch to ultra-slow presentations like a drop shot or a Ned rig barely crawling along the bottom structure. I tested this across 3 winters with a logbook tracking temperature, drop count, and effective duration for every single fishing session I completed. At 65 degrees, 2 drops held strong for a full 30 minutes. At 55 degrees, those same 2 drops faded noticeably by minute 15 out there. But here is a factor that might matter even more than temperature, and I have never heard a single fishing show or magazine article discuss it seriously. Water clarity changes everything about how a base finds food, and it determines whether anise oil is a nice bonus or your primary weapon out there. In clear water where you can see 4 feet down, a bass relies mostly on its eyes to locate and evaluate prey before committing to a strike. In stained water with 1 to 3 feet of visibility, scent and vibration become the primary search tools that bass depend on to find food. In muddy water after a heavy rain where visibility drops below a foot, scent is often the only way a bass can locate your bait at all. That means anise oil goes from helpful advantage in clear conditions to absolute dominant factor when the water turns to chocolate milk after a storm. I specifically head to the lake after heavy rain events when most anglers are loading their boats back onto trailers and heading home defeated. My personal best largemouth, an 8.4-pound tank, came after 3 days of solid rain when visibility was less than 6 inches of murky water. I was dragging a black and blue jig with a Paca chunk trailer, 2 drops of anise on that chunk, along a riprap bank in water that looked like coffee with extra cream. The bite was nothing dramatic, just a subtle heaviness on the line like I had dragged into a wet towel sitting on the bottom down there. I set the hook and that fish exploded out of the surface like a submarine-launched missile heading straight for the sky above the water. She found my bait purely by scent in conditions where she could not have seen it from 3 inches away in that muddy water. Now I need to save you from the 3 mistakes that will completely destroy everything I just taught you about this method today. Mistake number 1 is using too much oil, because more than 2 drops creates a wall of scent that triggers avoidance instead of curiosity. Think about walking past a bakery where the smell of fresh bread makes you want to walk in and buy something delicious and warm. Now think about walking into a chemical factory where the smell is so overpowering that your only instinct is to turn around and leave immediately. Same nose, completely different reaction, and base respond to scent concentration exactly the same way as you would in that situation. Mistake number 2 is mixing anise with commercial attractants, because I tried this once thinking more scent equals more fish on the line. I combined anise oil with a popular commercial garlic crawfish gel on the same bait, expecting to create some kind of super attractant formula. I blanked that entire tournament day, 0 fish, and that evening I went back with plain anise alone and caught 4 bass in 2 hours on the same spots. The synthetic compounds and preservatives in commercial products create chemical reactions with anethol that produce an unnatural off-note bass will not tolerate. Mistake number 3 is applying oil to your fingers first and then handling the bait, because human skin transfers sweat and soap and sunscreen residue onto everything you touch. Base can detect a compound called L-serine from human skin oil at incredibly low concentrations, and it triggers an immediate avoidance response in the fish. Always hold the bait by the hook, drip oil directly from the pipette onto the plastic, and never touch the treated area with your bare skin. The difference between catching one base with this method and catching 5 consistently comes down to one boring word that nobody wants to hear from me today: discipline. Specifically, reapplication discipline, because anise oil fades and you need to treat it like a resource that requires constant renewal on the water. The first 5 minutes after application are your peak window when the scent plume is at maximum intensity and maximum reach through the water. By minute 20, that plume has weakened to roughly 30% of its original strength, and your radius has shrunk significantly around the bait. By minute 35, it is functionally gone, and you are fishing a dead bait that smells like nothing special to any base nearby. Set a silent 20-minute timer on your phone, and when it buzzes, you reapply 2 fresh drops and reset that timer immediately without exception. After every caught fish, you reapply immediately too, because the teeth and mouth of that base scrubbed most of the oil right off your bait. I got lazy about this once, caught fish steadily for 2 hours, then the bite died and I spent an hour changing spots before realizing I had not reapplied in 45 minutes. 2 fresh drops on the same bait in the same spot, and the very next cast produced a solid strike from a base that had been there the whole time waiting. Now let me address the question that has been sitting in the back of your mind since you read the title of this video on your screen. Why does nobody at the tackle shop ever mention this? And why is a $6 bottle of kitchen oil not sitting right next to the rods and reels on display? The math tells you everything you need to know about why this secret stays quiet in the retail fishing industry around the country. A bottle of commercial attractant runs $8 to $22, and the average serious bass angler buys 4 to 6 bottles every single season of fishing. That is $50 to $130 per year flowing into one product category that keeps shops profitable and manufacturers in business consistently. One bottle of pure anise essential oil costs $5 to $8 and lasts an entire season, maybe 2 if you fish once or twice a week. If every bass angler in America switched tomorrow, the commercial attractant industry would lose over $200 million in annual revenue overnight. Tackle shops are not villains, and I'm not here to make them into bad guys because I buy my rods and reels and line from those same stores every season. But a product that costs $6 and never needs replacing does not generate the repeat purchases that keep a retail business running through the year. Here's the part that should really raise your eyebrows and make you think twice about what you have been paying for all these years. Many commercial attractants actually list a nethol or a nice extract right on their ingredient labels, buried in small print on the back of the bottle. The active compound that makes this whole method work is already inside the products you have been paying $15 to $20 to buy from the store. But it is diluted with fillers, synthetic fragrances, UV dyes, and preservatives that reduce its effectiveness compared to the pure oil sitting in your kitchen. You are paying a 300 to 400% markup for a watered-down version of something you could buy pure for a fraction of the price today. Here's what I want you to do tonight when you get home from watching this video. Go to your garage and grab one of your commercial attractant bottles off the shelf. Flip it over, read the ingredient list, and I would bet my best rod that you will find a nethol or anise extract or star anise oil listed somewhere on that label in the fine print. When you find it, and you will find it, come back here and drop a comment telling me what brand it was so we can build the longest list of proof this community has ever seen together. Your action plan is 3 steps, and you can start today, not next week, not when the season opens, but today before you go to bed tonight if you want. Step 1. Buy a bottle labeled 100% pure anise essential oil from Whole Foods, Sprouts, the vitamin aisle at CVS or Walgreens. Or search Amazon if you live rural and those stores are not nearby. Look for bottles that say pure therapeutic grade or steam distilled on the label, and expect to pay $5 to $8 for something that lasts all year. Step 2. Transfer a small amount into a half-ounce amber glass dropper bottle for your tackle box, and you can find multi-packs of those little bottles at Hobby Lobby or Amazon for under $1 each. Keep the main bottle at home in a cool, dark cabinet because essential oils maintain full potency for 2 to 3 years when stored properly away from heat and light. Step 3. On your very next trip to the water, run your own test with two identical rods, one bait treated with 2 drops and one completely clean and untreated. Alternate casts, count every single bite on each rod and let the numbers tell you the truth instead of taking my word for anything I said today. After 40 years on the water, I am still discovering things that make me feel like a beginner again. And that is exactly what keeps me in love with this sport every single morning I wake up. The best fishing secrets I have ever learned did not come from a product catalog or a sponsored video or a magazine advertisement with glossy photos and bold claims. They came from handshakes on muddy banks, from quiet conversations at boat ramps before sunrise, from the generosity of strangers who loved fishing enough to share what they knew freely. This channel is my version of that bankside bench where two anglers sit together and trade what they have learned over a lifetime on the water. I never saw that old man at the reservoir again. Never learned his name, never got the chance to thank him properly for changing my entire approach. But every single time I open that little amber dropper bottle and put 2 drops of anise oil on a bait before casting, I think about that morning. I think about a man in a beat-up John boat who knew something that 4 decades of tournaments and tackle shop visits never once taught me about catching fish. Next time, I am going to show you 3 more kitchen ingredients that work as fish attractants, and one of them goes on your breakfast every morning without you ever suspecting it could catch bass. If you learned something new today, hit subscribe so you do not miss that video. Drop a like if this was worth your time, and tell me in the comments whether you have ever used a kitchen ingredient on the water, because your story might be the one that teaches all of us something new.